Well, first up, joining me this week is someone earning Harpin cap number 71, and he has double cause for celebration this weekend as he is the newly crowned Harpin Prediction League champion. Welcome back to Mr. Tom Coleman.
I'm going to be modest in my victories. Just snatching Keane in the last week is not to rub salt in wounds, but I was lucky. It was a bit of luck. It was a bit of luck. That's
There
all.
was literally, going into the final week, there was literally point zero 0.08 of a point in it
There's a
between them.
fine
It
line
was
between
ridiculous.
genius and madness.
There you go. There you go.
Love it.
And also here is someone making his 42nd appearance. He was the guy who finished an agonizingly close second in the prediction league. But I have a feeling the result in Croker just about made up for that. Hello once again to Mr. Keenan Willor.
Thanks for having us back, Jeff. Yeah, to be honest, delighted with the Leinster win, and yeah, if I was gonna go out, I went out at the top, swinging in the brew, and couldn't have been to a more fitting opponent.
I think you mentioned that it could have been possibly those late Glasgow tries last week that made a difference, was it?
It was what made a difference going into the final round. But to
Yeah,
be honest, Tom got a clean win then on
he
the last
did.
weekend, and I'm actually delighted that he doesn't have that bitter taste of Glasgow tries in his mouth to go with
Exactly. You
coming out
don't
of the sup in the cup.
you don't want any bit of that for sure. And also, by the way, since I have Keno, he's also a host slash producer for the excellent Mother Ruckers, the Irish Women's Rugby Podcast. And you've just kicked off your second season, am I right?
Yeah. Kicked off season 2 of Mother Rucker, the only Irish women's rugby podcast. And the first episode is, if I may say so myself, a cracker. We've got Jane Clossy and Neve Noddy O'Dowd live out of Ireland camp, chatting pre-season chaos, first cap stories, and what really goes on behind the scenes in Ireland camp. So it's called Pitch Perfect, that episode, and give it a listen. You'll see why. Get it wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, you definitely want to subscribe to that. There's a World Cup just around the corner, and that's exactly where you want to be to listen to everything to do with that. In fact, I'm doing all these plugs so I can get the Chewy on as well onto Harpin maybe for a quick chat before the World Cup gets going. But we'll move on to that at a later date. Okay, listen, lads, let's crack on with our feature match of the week. Here's a generic 50-word summary of what happened on the day. Leinster Rugby defeated Vodacom Bulls 32-7 to win the BKT URC title at Croke Park, attracting a record crowd for an Irish final. Key tries were scored by Conan, Barrett, Vanderfleer, and Gunn. Leinster's strong defense and strategic play secured their first trophy in 4 years. Now, the lads have picked out some key themes from the match. We're going to start with Tom. A couple of weeks ago, he was on Harpin about Leinster's kicking game against the Scarlets, and once again, it played a big part in the final.
Yeah, just harping back to the Scarlets game, I suppose just a sort of 20-second recap. I sort of bemoaned the fact that we seem to be between two tactics against the Scarlets. We had our kicking game and it would get us into a good position in the game. And then for other reasons, we sort of went away from it. And there was a lot of offloading out of the back of the tackle, just a lot of not exact enough around that sort of detail, led to a lot of messy ball and scrambling on the deck. And then as soon as it tightened up again, Leinster would resort to kick. And I'm not just saying we're a kick only team, we're obviously a lot more than that, but we kick for a reason in different parts of the field and for for different results. Um, but if Scarlets was a work in progress, I think they definitely fine tuned it over the last couple of weeks against Glasgow and obviously then the Bulls at the weekend. Even with the late change at 9, which is Gibson Park is so key to part of our kicking game. There is kicking options throughout that back line. We know Sam can kick. We know James Lowe with his exits, Jamie Osborne when he's playing, Jimmy O'Brien obviously is a decent exit, Jordy Barrett, who we used a lot on the weekend. But Gibson Park is key for those box kicks that sort of drop in between that initial defensive line and the back three, and he's so good at just dropping it in the right place. You see a lot of those kicks just dropping outside the 22, and it's sort of forcing errors. And but I think where Leinster really improved over the last few weeks is the mix up of our kicking. There was lots of grubber kicks, lots of those kicks that I mentioned. Even though Luke McGrath came in at the last minute, and bar the first one where he kicked it out in the full. He had a very good game from the boot. He was just dropping it right on the money and making it very, very difficult for the Bulls. The Bulls weren't sure whether to sit back You could see them stepping back towards their 22 because they were half expecting either Prendergast to go long with a spiral or give it to Barrett, he'd go long, or even if James Lowe has been used as a left-footed exit. So the Bulls back 2/3 were worried about whether how far up to come, and that left a big gap between the Bulls, sort of you can imagine in 12 or 13 men across that defensive line, and the two or three hanging back. And Leinster really exploited that space. There was some talk after the game, and I know Keane will talk about the physicality shortly, about targeting the opposition strengths. But one of the, and obviously the scrum was one of the main talking points pre-game. But Bulls' kicking game was outstanding last year. If we hark back to last year's semi-final, it really was the difference between us winning and losing the game. Willie LaRue really gave us a torrid time, and he targeted that area. We were worried about the altitude and kicks going 60, 70 meters. And I can't recall exactly who was at the back that day, but I know Jimmy Bryan was one, I think, probably Jim's Low. Um, and we got caught in that middle space between the initial defensive line and where our back three. So, in some ways, we turned it back on the Bulls this weekend. We took good learning, sign of a good team, sign of a good coaching team. We took good learnings from that experience, and maybe over the last few weeks, even though I had frustrations in between the Northampton loss and maybe the Scarlets game about how exact we were around it, and how we probably weren't sticking on script, so to speak, because we did speak about after I think it was the Glasgow game as well, or the observation was that they were given not a hairdryer at half time, but really told to stick to script. And you tell a lot of the team, a lot of Leinster the last few weeks when they came out at half time, they were really on script about kicking, and it didn't matter if it was those Gary Owen bombs just dropping outside the 22, or those little box kicks over the top that we spoke about. Luke McGrath did. They seem to be more focused on the mind. But I think the difference this week was, and coupled along with the conditions, we really did focus in on it this week. And bar 1 or 2 hours, I know Sam tried a crossfield kick that went probably at the wrong time. But when you're only counting 1 or 2 instances over the course of 80 minutes on poor kicks, a lot of them kicked 42 kicks, I think, in the game. And looking at it, 40 of them were decent kicks, and I think we'd have posited an outcome on, or as in getting the ball back or getting the ball back a phase after it, on nearly 3/4, which is unbelievable. And it doesn't work without a good kick chase, and obviously that's probably why Ryan Baird is to the fore the last couple of weekends. He's just a real terrier when it comes to chasing down. So kicking is good, and it's not, as I mentioned before, it's not kicking for kicking's sake. I mean, the best teams in the world, France with their fancy backline, as soon as they go 2 or 3 phases in midfield, if they're not going anywhere, they kick. And it was all about putting pressure for us on Bulls, and giving them, really a thorough time trying to exit out of the half, out of their own half or outside their own 22. And I think all bar one occasion when I looked to rewatch the match, we lost the kicking duel. There was one where I think Willie LaRue put in a really good kick. It just landed about maybe a metre or two outside our try line. Jimmy O'Brien had to scarper back, and he kicked it just beyond the 22. That is the only time in the whole game where we lost yardage in the kicking duel against a very good kicking team as well. As I alluded to already, the Bulls tore us apart last year with their kicking game. So we were up against a very good kicking team. This is going head to head with a team that are well used to doing to others what we did to them the weekend. So I think that was a sign of how well A, our execution had to be, and how B, we did it. Um, Obviously one of the highlight kicks of the weekend was, and you can, people watch back of the game for Geordie Barrett's try. You can see McGrath lining up the little box, and but Barrett behind him, his left ear, giving him the call, and Tommy O'Brien knows what the call as well is, and it's just perfectly executed. Yeah, you make your own luck with a little bit of a hack through, but at the end of the day, you had two Bulls defenders running into each other, and we all know, Geordie ran through and did like any good Mead man and finished under the Davin stand with a score. Yeah, we are still claiming him. We are still claiming him down in County Meath. But yeah, it was just maybe it was a work, maybe it was a work in progress the last few weeks. I know Leinster have been, I call it an off-ball team this season, which is the term for we prefer to not have possession, but I think that's too harsh. I think we kick at certain times, and once we get into the opposition 22, our attack then comes alive, and you could see Sam trying to get into attack and play then as soon as what you're trying to do is force an error, um, get into broken play, and then really attack those spaces. And that's where Leinster upped the ante. There was one instance where we put a nice box kick through. Again, Geordie Barrett got up with a lovely, nearly like a basketball flick back. I think it was Thomas Clarkson may have caught it on the run. And if you freeze frame that, you can see how disorganized the Bulls' defense is. And it might have been that instance where Sam kicked it away, his one-ish poor kick of the game, where he kicked it to trying to crossfield to Tommy O'Brien. But that's what it's generating. It's generating broken defense. It's a way of defenses are so good these days. It's a way of sort of breaking up the defense and really putting on the pressure. And we did play the conditions really, really well. Like it was, the three of us were in the ground. It was biblical at times, some of the rain. And yeah, like it was against Glasgow, I think that big shower towards the end of the game as well. So, Leinster really played the conditions well. And it's funny, the Bulls were hoping for rain for other reasons, which didn't really materialise. But they didn't really play the conditions as well as we did. So yeah, kudos to the players and kudos to the coaching team. They just, fine tuned what they needed to do over the last few weeks and executed it, which is the key thing. Just executed when they made it at the time when they needed to in a final. We've sort of been waiting for that moment to get that execution in the final. For a few years, I'm sure there's been a few lines written about that over the last while with Leinster. So we're glad to come out on the positive side of one. So yeah, I was really impressed with them. Just from a, yeah, Jeff thankfully invites us on to review these games. You tend to try and learn as a fan or a coach. You're trying to learn what's the work in progress for Leinster. And if you look at the block of the last three games, you can see what we're trying to do and what we're trying to do, and it peaked at the right time, which is what you wanted to happen. So yeah, well done to Jacques Nienaber and Tyler Blanehall and Leo and etc. just for getting it right on the day. And the players, as I said, the execution was top class. Literally 40 out of 42 was a positive kick that I seen throughout the whole game. So yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not as if the Bulls weren't aware of that we were going to be going for that kind of kicking style. I mean, I would like we all knew that the news about Gibson Park, dropping out on the day was a big loss. It was big, it was he was a big part of our especially our exit kicks. And I had a feeling, the first thought I had, what little I know about it, was that maybe especially on the restarts, they might target Luke. But then again, they probably knew that, if they did target Luke, he'd just ship it on to someone else who would be able to boot. So what they seemed to do on their first couple of kicks, they put it under our posts to Sam, and it would be Sam kicking. So if they had a decent chase, he'd be forced to kick straight away from deep. Now he still did pretty well on his clearance from there, but that in itself was an acknowledgement of our kicking game from the Bulls. I just thought that was interesting. But what did you think,
Yeah, I mean, I thought the Leinster kicking game was on point, and it was interesting to try and contrast it with the Bulls, because I mean the Bulls have a very similar kind of kicking game plan. They kick to dominate territory. Their intent was to test Leinster under the high ball and play the game in the right areas, because they rely so much on the strength of their scrum and line out. It's a strategy they've leaned on all season. Second highest team in the URC for kicks from hand, only behind Leinster. Given the weather as well, damp ball, misty air, slick surfaces, you could see the logic of it. You don't play too much rugby in your own half. You force errors from your opponent instead. And, so the plan wasn't flawed in theory. It just, on the day, it didn't translate into practice. Leinster were better at executing a very similar strategy on the day. Um, for them, the real issue wasn't the volume of kicks, it was how poorly they were executed. Um, Goosen overhit several kicks meant to be contestable, but instead they sailed way too deep, allowing Leinster to call the mark or counter attack, or to return. Um, Leroux's decision making was, I think, to be nice about it, chaotic. He attempted chick kicks in and out of zone 22. None came off.
Yeah.
And at
One
that
that one,
early stage as well. I mean, there
yeah,
were only 2 tries down then, but still, it was really early.
Yeah, that one on 17 minutes straight to
Yeah.
James Lowe, like literally into his breadbasket. You couldn't
If
have
he
done a kick
caught
pass
that,
better.
Jesus.
Like
Yeah, yeah.
it was so close. It would have been a try. It was just the knock on spared their blushes.